Thank you everybody for coming to join us. We have a number of people from all over the world. This workshop is part of our a series of workshops that we are offering for the post-COVID hack. This is actually the last workshop as well. The next kind of event is going to be the final kind of demo day in a few weeks' time. Like I said earlier, this workshop will be recorded, and we should be able to share this with you within the next couple of days or so. Today's workshop is around introduction to DeFi. There is a number of areas that Anish will cover today. And in terms of asking questions, we have a small group. So what we'll do is we'll just allow everybody to kind of unmute themselves and interject with questions along the way, just so that we keep it more interactive. And feel free also to use the chat app here on the right-hand side if you have any questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Anish Mohammed, who has been in the blockchain space for many, many years, has also worked within the kind of security cryptography space, has presented, in a number of conferences in this space, as well as an advisor to a number of main projects in the blockchain space. So he's here to answer any of your questions, whether it's business or technical. Feel free to throw them at Anish. So over to you, Anish, all yours.
Thank you, Antonio. Good afternoon, everyone. This is going to be a real whirlwind, as in like I am going to go through a lot of material in quite a fast pace. So you have to forgive me for the speed I'm going through. And if you have any questions, please try stop me. So without much ado, here we go. There has been a lot of interest in the media and lots of interest everywhere about DeFi. And what is the real difference between traditional fintech and DeFi? So as you could typically imagine, the traditional fintech will actually have, a significant amount of bureaucracy, a set of centralized power that kind of enforces what is supposed to be done. And there's the software, this trust base that actually enforces the whole thing. In DeFi, in theory, you shouldn't have any bureaucracy. In that sense, like in true DeFi, once the protocol has been created and released to the world, the bureaucracy should be non-existent, and so-called trust minimized software should actually really make this happen. So you might ask, what is it that is actually making this happen? So just to give you some context, I would describe it in like 3 layers. So the lowermost layer that actually has enabled DeFi to happen at this current state is Ethereum, right? So Ethereum, as probably you will all know, is one of the blockchains that's there. And Ethereum is a blockchain which actually has the ability to do smart contract. It was actually created by a bunch of people, including Vitalik. And, there are a bunch of papers. If you end up reading any of them, you probably might find my name too there. I'm guilty of reviewing one of them. So in theory, what it does is it has this ability to do smart contract, which is attaching policy to data. Now you need all the instruments that you actually have in the traditional fintech space or the financial engineering space that has come into DeFi, okay? So you've got 2 layers. So first, a wire on which you could actually do transactions. Second is all the set of things that actually happen. Think of them as the kind of products and mechanisms that are there. And the third piece, that's the more interesting piece and kind of makes this whole thing unique and able to happen, is this governance piece. And again, this is kind of a byproduct of actually having blockchains and byproduct of actually having smart contracts. Because you could attach policies to data, then you could have new structures of governance, like DAOs, right? Distributed autonomous organizations. So this allows you to actually have new products released and these products being governed in a very decentralized manner. And this allows you to have new kinds of instruments available for everybody. So if you were to look at DeFi in context, you can actually think of it this way. There are, I took it from staking rewards. It's typically described in like 4 layers. There's like a legacy layer where you actually look at all the things that you would require, which is for bridging between the traditional world and the new world. This would be the financial bridges and facilitators. Then a whole layer that actually looks after things for consumers, which could be like, wallet providers, browsers, data providers, staking services, automated asset management. Okay. Just to remind you, I might talk about automated market making. That's slightly different from automated asset management. Okay. And then you actually have the core finance and strategy piece where you actually have all the kind of tools that are there. You probably would see, saving and lending, which shouldn't be anything new to you, and liquidity and market making. And in here is a real paradigm shifter that has come in. So I will touch upon this briefly, and I will touch a bit about Uniswap and how Uniswap really changed the game, and a bit about DEX just in general, but I don't think I'll be going a lot into details, okay? So obviously, as I was describing, this DEXs are layers and aggregators, but DEXs are the most important and the most significant thing that has really changed everything. And then obviously, one other thing really enabled all of this to happen. That's the stablecoin, right? And then there are insurances. So if you think about insurances, Nexus Mutual is one of the insurance startups that's out of UK. It very much leverages the cooperative legal structure the UK has and used innovation to create a product that's for DeFi. And then there is the bridges. You need to actually talk to the centralized world. If you have money in the DeFi world, it means nothing in the real world if you don't have a bridge. So you have a bunch of payments, fiat bridges, right? And as I was describing, the underlying is typically Ethereum. You can have Bitcoin. So you would actually have like stable currencies moving, kind of stabilizing Bitcoin into an ERC20. Tether, for example. I'll talk a bit about that. Then there are other blockchain protocols like Polkadot, Cosmos. And then other important thing that exists there, and the people might recognize it most, is oracles. So oracles are, as you might recognize from history, is the some person who has this imaginary ability to give you an answer given any question you ask. So in this instance, we have an oracle called Chainlink, and Chainlink is one of the well-known oracles. And it actually is useful for smart contract to make a decision. Let's imagine that we actually had a flight insurance smart contract. So effectively, when you get on a flight, you buy this insurance. The insurance gets, the value that you need to be paid out gets into your wallet, gets locked in the smart contract. The smart contract needs to know if the delay to the flight is being caused by weather or COVID, right? So you can have a code oracle and then a climate oracle or the weather oracle. The weather oracle will say, look, the flight wasn't delayed because of weather and it wasn't canceled because or delayed by COVID. Then you might get paid out. This is essentially what that means, okay? So as I was saying, the key components here that really made this happen is stable coins, okay? I will touch upon this a bit. In general, what it means is if you look at a very bad day in crypto, you could actually have up to like 40% volatility, okay? That is like a significant amount of volatility. So what that means is you might go to a shop, you might order a coffee, you ask the person, how much does this coffee cost? They go $5, okay? And the person makes a coffee. By the time you get your coffee in your hand, it might just go, you know what? Now it's $9, okay? So this is the kind of volatility you actually see in the crypto space. So what do you want to have? You want to have some sense of stability. So you actually have, 10 whatever cryptocurrency, and the worth of it in the traditional world is kind of stabilized. So there are a lot of mechanisms to do that. There are a few of them that actually really enable this whole DeFi things to happen. One would be Tether, other would be DAI. I will talk a bit about Tether because it has some interesting prehistory to it. Then the next thing that you would recognize is lending and saving. And again, it so happens that London seems to have had some interesting impact to this whole, DeFi space. I'm going to give you my view, the Londonized view of DeFi in this sense. So lending and saving app protocol came out of London. And the person, I forget the CEO's name. I met him a couple of times. It's pretty interesting. Lending and saving, as you could recognize, that is something I need to give you a context to give you an idea of why the kind of change is happening in DeFi is happening. So the first thing that's happening is globally, yield as for any instrument has actually decreased. So everybody is on the hunt for yield. Okay, yield is like if you have $100, the most traditional way to invest is you go buy US Treasury bonds. And, a few months back, there was a yield inversion, okay, for US Treasury bonds. Typically, if you buy US Treasury bonds, you get coupons between 2.4 to 2.6 coupons. So that's considered the lowest risk because you don't assume, US Treasury would actually default on its loans, okay? And then you actually increase the risk. And when you increase the risk, you want to actually normalize, the return for investment. When I mean by normalize return of investment is like, if you take higher risk, then you might get a higher return. But given the risk you take, are you getting the equivalent amount of money or return? This is called, we have an index called the Sharpe index, and we use that. So this is one of the reasons why we actually have this massive boom of money entering DeFi space, right? And also the fact that a lot of the tools that's available has become very user-friendly. Again, there are a couple of things that I need to mention. I will definitely mention Yearn. So Andre has been around this ecosystem. He has been in London. So this is why I'm kind of saying a lot of the people who are the cast in this crew have all walked around London. They might have moved around, but London seems to have some vibe about DeFi. Maybe it's the fact that London has been the center for finance for a long time, and blockchain came to London, and a small intersection of the two population actually happened, right? So market making. Now, this is something that's interesting, and I have one slide at the very end. The reason I say this is interesting is there was a project that came out of Ethereum crew, which is called Uniswap. Why is this interesting? So in the world of centralized world, we have the concept called exchanges. So imagine me and Antonio actually have an agreement. I say, Antonio, I want to sell some BTC. I don't have any, okay? But in the imaginary world, imagine I had some BTC, right? Say I had 10 BTC, right? And, say one of you say, oh, where's Pragit? Pragit is not here. Okay, Pragit is there. So my friend Pragit, who's in the audience, I say to him, like, Pragit, he is like the person who runs the exchange, and Antonio is the one who wants to buy the BTC. So typically speaking, what will happen is like I hand over my BTC to Pragit, and Antonio hands over his money to Pragit, and we both trust Pragit, okay, to actually for a period in time keep the money and give us both the things. Not always does this work. The classic example of how this doesn't work is called I forgot the name of the very famous first 2011 complete failure of an Mt. Gox. Okay, Mt. Gox is the classic example of a complete and utter failure of an exchange. But that hasn't been the only one. Pretty much a lot of the well-known exchanges actually have had security leaks. And again, if you were to think about DeFi, and if you were to think of DeFi going forward and becoming a significant chunk of what's happening in the market, I would say literally you require pretty much three things. First thing that should happen, I would say, is at a stance right now, one of the things that holding back a lot of people from actually entering the space is the gas fees. So gas fees is like similar to, if you are an American, you will recognize gas. When you get a car, you put gas or gasoline, right? So in Ethereum, if you want to run a transaction, you need to actually pay for the transaction with transaction fees. Okay. So in Ethereum, you have to do that, and all the mine is collected. So why is this important? When the number of transactions that is on the Ethereum network goes above a particular limit, then it's like a queue, and a queue where people are willing to bribe the doorman, right? And then it's an auction run by a doorman to allow people into a room. And this actually causes an increase in cost of transactions, okay? So this is literally what is happening. And when increase in cost of transaction happen, small transactions that can actually create small amounts of value, I mean, it no longer makes economic sense. So that's the first thing we need to actually have to think about. What will happen if we don't have enough of throughput in Ethereum? There are a lot of possibilities that can happen. Ethereum already has Ethereum 2.0 that's coming around. There is roll-ups that's happening, of domestic roll-ups that's happening. Sharding is around the corner. Then there is ZK roll-ups. So there are a bunch of solutions that this might actually be improving. I would kind of describe this as a surge pricing on an Uber. Like, you can think of London. It's like, right now, if you probably get an Uber, you probably will be able to go to most places pretty cheap. When London is not on a kind of, this kind of known COVID situations, everybody would know how much surge prices might happen to you. While you're just watching on a Uber, the price just goes up. Literally, that happens in Ethereum, and that's literally what congestion does to you. Okay, it's a congestion charges. Let's put it that way, right? And then I was talking about market making and liquidity, and market making essentially means like when me and Antonio are actually talking about buying and selling, we might have a difference in prices, right? I might say to Prageet, I am willing to sell my BTC at 10,000. And Antonio might say, you know what, I'm only willing to buy it 9,500. There's a gap between the two. So this needs to be kind of fixed, and that's what they call market making. And the other thing is called liquidity. If Antonio wants to actually buy not 10, but 100 BTC, that is a bit of a challenge. He can't buy it. So you need to actually have some ability to actually get this. That's called liquidity, okay? So you can go to a market and you can actually get more. So,
Dr. Mohammed,
sorry?
I have a question about market making. Is a trusted party always necessary because there needs to be a gap?
No. So, the one that I was describing, Uniswap, is a clear case of, decentralized market making. So you can actually have a smart contract. You can have a constant function market making mechanism. So you have x into y equals constant kind of thing, and you get on a curve. I actually have a very last slide kind of showing what this is. So literally I have 2 slides kind of describing it once more. I'm just trying to give a very high level, and then I'm going to go really fast. So I just wanted to give everybody a high level view. So summary answer to you is no, it's not required. B, there is already existing mechanisms and indexes that will allow you to do market making. C, there are protocols that does this. There's this concept of liquidity pools that's already there, and liquidity mining in that sense as well. So you could do lots of those things. You might then ask, can you do without an oracle? That is going to be a bit of a challenge, if that's what you were pointing me at. So if you are thinking, can you do this without an oracle? That's a bit of a challenge. But there are ways by which you could do that, not really hard. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. We will get to that later on, I understand.
Okay. So derivatives. So, traditional finance actually has derivatives and synthetics. So, all that's happening here is like we've just borrowed whatever that's there and just applying it onto crypto. And then the thing I was describing and been talking about quite a bit is DEXs, right? So Uniswap is a DEX. You normally have market making and liquidity both in exchanges and in DEXs. And in DEXs really, really made the change. So I will show you why in like next slide, and then you will really understand. So this talk actually is like a second iteration of a talk I gave my students, and during lockdown, I ended up actually teaching a couple of courses in various universities, because typically I just give a guest lecture and disappear. When you're in a lockdown, you have no excuses to give. So I ended up teaching whole courses. So my students have this ability to choose whatever topics they like. So they voted for DeFi. So I agreed to give a whole talk, and I gave the talk in June. And literally, I took the slides and I went, how much has changed since I gave the talk in June, and I wanted to give you what 5 months in DeFi really means, and actually give you like a very high level idea of what happened. What is it that DeFi is all about? What are the things that's happening? And then show you really what changed in 5 months. And like, if you were to have a crystal ball, the kind of returns that you could make in DeFi is ridiculous. I have known, investors that's made more than 64,000% return on investment. Okay, this is public data. I'm just looking at wallet data set and going, wow, this is the amount of money this guy's put in. This is how much they probably would have got if they liquidated. It doesn't necessarily mean that they got the money out. That's a separate story. But I'm saying from the time they put the money into the time then it peaked, that real gain in value, which probably is incredibly almost impossible to find in a traditional space, has happened. Okay, and one of the things that has happened is this decentralized exchanges, right? That decentralized exchanges is literally what I was being asked. It's like, okay, can you do what I did with Prageet and Antonio without actually without trusting Prageet? So this is all about, how do you do this without that? And that's a DEX. And relays are like you actually get a transaction and you relate aggregators. So it's like sometimes you can easily produce liquidity by doing aggregation. Now, I told you briefly that London has been somehow gotten into this idea of creating a lot of DeFi protocols, decentralized insurance. It happens to be, another London scenario. For some reason, we have some co-op rules that allows us to set some organizational structure. Is part legal innovation, part technical innovation. It's Nexus Mutual. There are a couple of other ones. One of them is open. It's based out of the US. Then other things, which I said, very simple: payments, fiats, and bridges. You actually need to have gateways to talk to the decentralized infrastructure. Then, as Satish was kind of referring to, can you do things without trust? Unfortunately, we still need oracles. As I was saying, we need oracles, like the oracles for, okay, I'll try and give you a notion of why oracles are important. And when I talk a bit about Uniswap, maybe, I don't know if I have a slide about Uniswap. This is so many things I would like to talk and so little time. So I've been trying to compress everything, give you as much as I can in the first few slides, and then walk you through what has actually happened and give you some sense of a notion. So stop me if something doesn't make sense. And literally what I would say to any one of you who has lots of questions is like, I'm going to, or my team is actually going to run a series of 6 lectures free on the internet. So we've had so many questions from so many people, and it's a struggle answering everybody's questions. So we decided, why don't we do this? We put up a series of lectures going through the whole thing so people could come in, listen to it, and be better informed. This is one of the biggest challenges in DeFi, is that the pace at which the progress is happening is so fast that I am pretty sure stuff that I put down on this slide, I think early today morning, would be out of sync in terms of the market volume, which protocol is highest, or which would be the best basket of protocols that I should actually invest in by now. Okay, that's how fast this ecosystem moves. Now, privacy. I thought privacy should be there, and because I have this interest in zero-knowledge proofs, and typically I am always talking about privacy and zero-knowledge proofs and things of that sort. One of the key challenges with blockchain is all transactions are transparent. Anything you do is visible to everybody. And what does it imply? What that implies is like everybody knows what everybody does. And in some sense, there are some benefits to doing that, and in some sense, you probably don't want that to happen. So do you want everybody in the world to know whether you bought a coffee, do you want everybody in the world to know how much money you make, how much insurance you have, what medicine you buy? All of this is easily possible if there is no privacy. So we need to have privacy. And as always, given, I kind of described previously, like the major changes that are there. Typically, Ethereum doesn't talk to Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't talk to Cosmos. Cosmos doesn't talk to, I mean, I can't say that because it's like they all are building bridges. So one of the fads these days is everybody builds a bridge. It's a kind of a one-way bridge, and the other way bridge is kind of going on balancer. So it's kind of a cheeky mechanism, but is not real true consensus. When I say there is no consensus equivalency between two chains, okay? So there are mechanisms in place to allow you to do transactions between two sets of chains. Now, for the interesting part, okay? This is the slide I took in June the 10th, 2020, okay? It's kind of 5 months and 5 days ago. You should look at this chart. Look at the total volume that's there, okay? It's 973.5. And look, what is the dominant player? It's Maker. And how much does Maker have? Around 500 mil. Then there is synthetic, that's compound, and then there's AF. Okay, look now. Okay, so literally speaking, I think I made it like early morning today, so 3 or 4 in the morning. It has 11 billion. That's 11 times. Okay, and Uniswap, the DEX I've been talking about that came from the Ethereum ecosystem, is the biggest player. The Uniswap actually has 2.73 billion in a DEX. And what you need to recognize is, until recently, DEXs was an impossibility. Like if you were to compare the volume of transactions that actually happens in a centralized exchange, set of 4 centralized exchanges and the DEXs, you would see it was always less than 1%. That changed, okay? Maker still has a seat in the top 5. It has almost 2 billion. WBTC is a wrapped BTC in Ethereum. It is 1 bill. And surprise, no surprise, have, okay, the one that I was talking about, again, 1 billion. Then there's Curve, and then there's Compound. Curve also has some history in London. I'll come to it, you know, when we talk about it, okay? So this is the change. Look here, okay, and look here. Look at the change. Now, let's look at lending, right? At the 10th of June, 2020, it was 723 mil, and Maker was dominant. And, you know, you look at the protocols, you could see how things are. Look at this. Did it move? Okay, so look at the massive change, right? Still Maker is there. There are new players entering. Cream is not that big, but InstaApp is kind of there, but the major ones are the ones more or less the same. But the surge is massive. And I think the most pronounced one is DEXs, okay? This is the shocking one, okay? It's the most shocking one. Look, total value in USD in DEXs 5 months ago was 66 mil. And Uniswap had half of it, okay? And look at this, okay? 4.5 bill. And Uniswap still has 60% of that. Effectively means it has 2.7 billion over there, okay? This is what I say, the real flip that has actually happened. So typically speaking, this levels of volume would have never gone into a DEX in a traditional scenario, right? As in like traditional exchanges will be the one that actually would keep all of this, right? So there are some benefits in actually using a traditional exchange in one sense of speaking. Traditional exchanges have a leg in both worlds. So it has one leg in the decentralized world and the other leg in the centralized world. So the regulators actually have some sense of a control over a centralized exchange. They will have, if you are interested, you can have like a know your customer, anti-money laundering mechanisms. And then you can possibly sue them. I mean, I don't know of anybody who actually managed to sue them and get some money back, right? So the legal things that you normally expect in a traditional financial world exchange exist in so-called centralized exchanges. And effectively what that means is like they are typically expensive, all the things that you see are all, all there. For creating a DEX, you probably could write a code and then deploy it and be done with it. And it becomes everybody else's problem, right? And that's what DEX is all about. So there you go, decentralized exchanges. You see the difference, right? Now, I'm going to give you another example, assets, right? Just like, this doesn't have the same amount of changes, but even then, not bad, right? Going from 60 mil to 2 bill, right? That's like a 20 times increase. And the funny thing is kind of a lot of the things that has happened is some of these protocols were they were around for a while, and some of them really took off. Some had a takeoff and then came down. So, for example, DeFi is an example, and one of the things I wanted to mention about things that you require to actually have DeFi to succeed, I said one, reduce the congestion charges, or the transaction charges has to decrease, or transaction throughput has to increase. Second thing is security, and one example that I have in this slide, DeFi, is an example where things went the wrong way. So typically speaking, as I was saying, you have the ability to write a protocol you can deploy. So one of the things that's very important in the case of DeFi and in the case of blockchain is if you write smart contracts has multiple levels of operation. That's it. One is the language layer, which is actually typically if you write a program and you want to do validation. You can do that using static and dynamic analysis, and you could actually find some bugs. No, that's not the thing. The real thing is the attacks that's possible in the economic layer. For example, there was a bug found in Curve, found by one of the researchers in 0x. Literally, if you look at the logic, as in the language, it won't be, there'll be nothing wrong. But the bit that's missing is the economic layer. In the economic layer, you actually had a bug, and that could actually cause you significant harm. So there you go. So you need to actually fix security, okay? And the third thing I would say that you require in DeFi to actually have DeFi get to the place that it should get to is governance. So I was kind of talking about Yearn in that sense, and there is like a whole bunch of protocols that have not been very fair. So Curve is another example. So when I talk about Curve, I would say CEU had a startup called New Cipher, and personally I have negative data on how they operate. Then they went to YC. They changed the name from 0DB to New Cipher. New Cipher still exists. He left and created this protocol. And the reason I say these folks are funny is there was this voting rights that was there. And what has happened is like he just flipped a switch, reducing the total fraction of voting rights of everybody has to far below what it was, and Curve still having the highest voting rights. And then he blamed it on Fat Finger. Essentially, I don't believe, me being a Bayesian, having the data from his prior startup, I don't believe people like him who tell you they do something wrong and get a very strong pushback from the community and say, that was an accident. What is important and what is key for DeFi to really go to the levels that it should go to is to have real governance in place and transparency in place, okay? If we actually get these three things in place, much higher chances that we will see the continuous growth of DeFi to the level where we can actually have a lot of the instruments getting to real, comparable to the centralized finance things, okay? So assets and derivatives. Again, synthetics was pretty much all that was there. And I think synthetics is still dominant, but you can actually see the value that has changed. Payments, this is funny, 9 mil. But it's not that big. It's just 1.5 to 9. That's 10, like 15 times increase, right? So in general, what you see is between 20 to 40 times increase that has happened in 5 months time, right? So what you need to recognize is like if you were in this ecosystem and you build a protocol in the last 5 months time, you had 20 to 40 times increase in yield. And that is a very interesting scenario. You can do the numbers. Now, this is actually from June, and I just wanted to show you like total amount of money that was locked in at that point in time. And it is quite interesting. It's like the takeoff is still slow, but it was consistent. And then it really shot up and it has gone up and up again. So you might wonder, where does all this value come from? Part of the value comes in from other ecosystems. So part of the value comes in from BTC. And how does BTC interact with the DeFi ecosystem? I shall talk about, Tether, which is a stable coin, in a minute. But, these are the bridges I was talking about. You actually have something on Ethereum, which actually transfers values in a stable manner from the Bitcoin world into the Ethereum world, okay? And this is literally where I show you the top 10 ERC20s, and number one, guess is who? Tether, right? So the transfer from the BTC world to the Ethereum world is the thing, okay? And this is the thing that you should watch and you should recognize. Very, very, very important, okay? Look at the market cap and look at the 24-hour market volume, right? 24-hour market volume is twice the market cap. That should tell you something, right? That tells you that it's very high amount of transactions that's going through. If you only have 15 billion in total and you have 31 billion 24-hour volume, you are doing at least twice the total volume in one day. It's just one day I'm talking about, right? And the one in the second place is Binance One. And the third one is the one that you might probably find interesting. Remember, I was talking about oracles. And the Oracle guys actually got a token out there. And it actually, you could also see that, the 24-hour volume kind of aligns with how much they're being used. So it's like 700 mil is the 24-hour volume. It has 4 bill market cap. And the other ones that are interesting and kind of you might be interested in, which belongs to the DeFi ecosystem, is definitely DAI. DAI is under the stablecoin. And there's also Wrap DTC. I kind of showed you how much it was there, right? So these are the kind of things that are in the top 10. So if you were to go to Etherscan and look at the top 10 and look at the top 10 ERCs, what you're seeing is, a good chunk of them, I would say at least top 5 of them, are directly involved in DeFi. And the volume is enormous, okay? So I am not saying whole of Tether volume is actually DeFi. I would say a good chunk of the Tether volume is DeFi. And pretty much a good chunk of DAI is DeFi. A good chunk of WBTC is DeFi, okay? Does anybody have any questions for me?
So, Anish, is the DeFi world pulling away a lot of liquidity out of the opportunity to invest in Bitcoin, you'd say?
Yes and no. So the thing is, like, if you were to invest early on this year and then went through this whole year in BTC, you might have done okay. But it very much depends on what part of the cycle you're in. So if you entered, say, a DeFi protocol and you were one of the people who actually created it or was early part of the team, then the amount of money you actually would have made completely would have outstripped BTC by a very long mile. So, yes and no. Yes, in a sense, like if you had the appetite to actually do things actively and had more understanding of DeFi, you might have actually chose to actually go into DeFi. Again, it doesn't mean that you lose all your BTC. You could actually do something like you buy BTCs and you get Tether. I mean, you get a stable coin in that sense, and then you deploy Tether into a DeFi protocol, right? So there are, if you go to Uniswap, there's a Tether Ethereum pair. You kind of do liquidity mining there, and you could get yield out of it. So there are different strategies. It very much depends on what you really choose to do. Are you just thinking of just buying BTC and holding it, or are you thinking of taking a BTC, taking a position in BTC, taking that and converting it into something that would allow you to enter DeFi and get the yield? So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, okay, and this is what literally I was kind of saying. So this is kind of an old graph, but it should tell you what literally the variation that's happens, right? It's kind of massive volatility. It's BTC versus gold versus fiat. As you could recognize which is which, there should be no surprise. Without ever recognizing any of these things, you should be able to recognize which is gold and which is BTC and which is fiat, right? So as you recognize, there's a massive, massive volatility in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin volatility is the reason why you are likely to make more money and lose more money. So there's always a risk when you enter. It can go both ways. Right, now talking about Bitcoin, we need to talk about stable currencies. I will try keep this as short as possible because I have only reached halfway through and I haven't covered all the interesting protocols. Antonio, how many minutes do I have?
You can take as much as needed.
Wow, that's very kind of you.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So let me try give you like a quick summary of, let me look at my calendar as well, just to be sure that I don't have anything. Okay. So traditionally, when you have this kind of volatility, you have this mechanism called stablecoins. So you stabilize against something. So the most traditional one is you have a traditional collateral. So you collateralize it. So you could have been asset-backed, like gold-backed. Our money was all gold-backed at one point in time. It's no longer. Fiat-backed. In fiat-backed, you could have just one currency or a basket of currencies. You could have a mix, asset and, both, asset and gold-backed. Fiat and gold-backed. Then there's a crypto collateralized. So this would be like, you just back it with Ether, or you could actually have a combination of Ether and USD, crypto and fiat in that sense. Then there's an algorithmic one. So the kind of the algorithmic ones include like DAI and things of that sort. So I won't go into details, but it's like a different variants. So, okay, summary, the numbers are wrong, okay? Tether, as you saw, this is from an older slide. It is pretty much the slides I created from June. And the numbers are wrong because like the Tether really went through the roof. It's like 14 bill, right? As you just saw. Yeah, today morning it was 14 bill. When I had this slide, it was 2 bill. So, there is a lot of capital entering this market. So is it a good thing? I would have hoped so. So again, this has an interesting challenge. There are a bunch of people who are involved in creating this. There never has been a real audit of Tether that has published. They had challenges with regulatory compliance. Yeah, so I would say, and there is a paper that's kind of published that says that the price of Bitcoin and Tether have some interesting correlations. Okay, the downside of this collateralized thing is like it's centralized, it's inefficient, you require banking. You definitely will have challenges of, KMLIYC. There is always the thing of debt and taxes, and then anything that's centralized actually has some challenges with scalability. Then there's the crypto collateralized ones. So kind of they are decentralized, they have flexibility, and kind of have network effect. Once they become large enough, then they drive the whole thing up, right? Downside is like, as I would say, security is a mass problem. So one of the things that actually happened for MakerDAO is like they had a sell of 2 million or 4 million, and then somebody bought it for 0. Okay, it's resource intensive, it's kind of complex, and stability, sometimes it could be a bit lagged, because like what you need to recognize is Ethereum, as I said before, has this throughput restriction in that sense. So you could imagine 2 vessels. It's like a massive vessel and a small vessel, and there's a tiny hole, right? Irrespective of whatever you try, the amount of volume of water in either moving either way is limited. So the level of it won't change massively. So this is kind of the stability problem. However much, MakerDAO will try to make changes. If there's a significant move, the rebalancing would take a bit, because all the transaction gets into the queue, and that could be an interesting challenge. Okay, then, okay, let me just skip all of this. And I just wanted to show you this so you kind of understand what's happening. So this is an interesting thing. If you are an investor, you're wondering who are the people behind all this. As you could actually see, there's Pantera, there's A16Z, there's Polychain Capital, there's FPG, there's Coinbase, Shen Fund, Backdoor Capital, Digital Currency Group, a General Catalyst. Okay, so as you can see, all of them have invested significantly in this space. So if you were to indicate, if you were to take this as an indication of, VCs as being good predictors of where technology is going, they definitely should show you there is some scope. I'm never saying that, only I'm saying this as an observation. The top VC firms have already invested, and they invested in multiple. That also shows something, right? Multiple means they think the ecosystem is too early, there's more evolution to happen, they're reducing the risk by getting a basket. Now, I'm back to Tether. So, this is what Wikipedia says. Tether is a controversial cryptocurrency with tokens issued by Tether Limited. It formerly claimed that each token is backed by US dollar, but in 14th March 2019, it changed the backing to include loans to affiliate companies. Okay, so of the people who are really interested, you can actually read this up. But what you need to recognize is it is stable. You can actually buy BTC, and you can actually get Tether, and it will remain stable to best of the ability to very long periods of time. And if you are a bit more, how could I say, more time in your hand, and you are interested as an academic bent, there is this paper called "Is Bitcoin Really Untethered?" Okay, so this is by John Griffin and Amin Shens. They updated this paper. So it's almost a year ago they updated this paper. It kind of says, this paper investigates whether Tether, a digital currency pegged to the US dollar, is influenced Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency prices during 2017 boom. It is like a backward analysis, but the assumption here is like, if you look at that, it's pretty clear. If you look at the graph, you can read between the lines what's being said. So yes, so there are some entities in this ecosystem that have significant influence. Is this fair? I would say no. Is this the way that a DeFi should be? I should say no. And this goes back to the third point I was saying before. We need to have better governance, right? Better governance, better transparency. That would actually improve DeFi. Right, so this is like data from March 2015 to April 2020. There's a slight variation. It's not significant, but clearly a variation. You can actually see how much such a varied, right? Market value, again, this market value has shot through the roof. This was from my talk in June. As I said to you before, the value has really gone up. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about. Yes.
Another question.
Yeah.
I was thinking the auditability of crypto and algorithmic stablecoins, is that not easier than those backed by real world assets?
It depends would be my immediate answer. A good example is Curve. I'm going to talk about Curve, and I will tell you right now. Curve, even though it's kind of, the formula is quite simplistic, I don't trust the people who are behind it. As I said to you, I have raw data points, personal. from shares not being issued to other things, about the CEO, and public data where he actually flipped the kind of voting rights for people. So that's one bit. The other part of it, the more complicated part of it, is like you have a smart contract. Okay. So the thing that's happening is that you have to verify a smart contract. That means a language, solidity in this instance. And then there is the economic layer. So there's all the economic game theoretic things that can happen to you. And the economic layer need to be fully understood. Even if you do a normal traditional audit of a smart contract, that never implies that you will have all the checks against the economic attacks as possible. That exactly is what happened for Curve. So in one sense, it's easier, but at the same sense, it's harder, right? So the governance piece is completely not visible to you. Again, case of our Michael, who actually did what he did, right? So that is a governance thing. You would have never known, even if you look at the contract and you got it audited, that this is something that you could pull off, right? Just flip the votes instantaneously. In a traditional structure, you have all of this written down. You can actually see a lot of the things straight out. You get an auditor, the auditor could tell you a lot of the things straight out. Again, there are structures that could make this very, very hard, absolutely. So the immediate short answer, it depends. And it is possible for us to actually have much better transparency if all the makers of the protocols actually choose, effectively be transparent, publish as much as data as possible, and allow people to have a look under the hood. But
so it all depends on governance and transparency.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And how about regulation, maybe?
There are no real regulations in that sense, right? If you have a DeFi, currently, what can you do to a bunch of people who push a protocol and walk away, right? So there's nothing you can do. The protocol exists on its own, right? So Curve launched Ethereum Jan 2020. Michael had 0 DB. He was in level 39. And in theory, I was an advisor to 0 DB. And that's how I met him. And then he went to YC and changed the name to New Cipher. Then they did an ICO, raised 30 mil. Then he realized there's more money to be made in DeFi. So, I wrote a white paper, and then Curve became a thing, right? So what it does is like it kind of allows you to have a massive liquidity pool and kind of does an efficient, efficient stablecoin trading, right? So you could kind of think it comes into the same bucket at Uniswap and Balancer. Uniswap is the one that I've been talking about. And I think of the set of all protocols that you think is open, fair, and transparent, I think Uniswap would be the nearest to what exists. Because Uniswap came out of a Ethereum Foundation grant, which was given to somebody who had this idea. And he worked with a bunch of team for a longish period of time and got, real. Whereas a lot of the other projects just came out of nowhere in the last, I would say between a year and 6 months. Okay. So again, London had some very interesting events. So in June last year, we had one of the DeFi events organized by Cambriel Capital. And there were a lot of the people around the globe who had DeFi projects came and gave talks. And in the audience was a good number of people from London. And, it has resulted in a few projects. And the other thing you would notice is there are a good number of crypto funds in London. So, that might be one of the other reasons we kind of attract the kind of talent pool here. Okay, so I won't go into a lot of this boring detail. This is a more interesting one in one sense. Ian, Andreconde, I don't know how you pronounce his name. He has been around for a while. He has been working on different products. The initial idea was simple. He wanted to automate his task of allocating his stablecoin to have his highest yield on a regular basis. As you could think of, any hacker worth the salt would try to do this. He started building that for his friends and other people. And suddenly it overgrew. It's like all good things. You start building a few lines of code, then you add more and more features, and then it goes, more and more sophisticated, and then it became a community. And there were some challenges around the community. Again, friends of Curve actually threatened him when he had a security bug. Okay, I'm just going to stop around V1 because I really don't want to go into a lot of detail. It has a lot more functionality than I have here. In summary, it was something which had a real UI. It allowed people to do things really fast. It allowed people to go find the best field and do rebalancing in that sense, okay? And while doing so, you actually got some governance coins. And the value of the governance coins actually shot through the roof, okay? Okay, this is, again, another of the protocols that I thought I should mention. This one had a longer history than most of the other ones. Compound was kind of released in 2018. They really wanted to do crypto assets. Then they, pivoted, introduced liquidity mining, and right now it's a algorithmic money market protocol, essentially, in that sense. It has some interesting characteristics, but if you're interested, you should actually read the white paper. They are published a lot of the stuff. It's kind of interesting. I think the most interesting one that actually really changed the game was Yearn, right? It completely changed the game in that sense. From a protocol perspective, that's not a DEX or anything like that. But from a DEX perspective, it was definitely Uniswap. So given that I'm talking about Uniswap, this is kind of what Uniswap really does in a strange sense of speaking. So you have like two things. So imagine you want, USDT at one end, and you have, Ether in one end. So you kind of have a constant ratio for which you actually buy and sell. And this is what in technical terms is called market making, automated market making. And this is the reason why you actually need it. As I was saying before with the example where I had Prageet and Antonio. So, you have buyers and sellers. There's a gap between the buy and sell. Oh, my price was good. Like I had 10,000 here, 9,900. I said 9,500. Okay, fine. Spread of 100. Like, and this is what it is. It's like you want to get it closer and closer, and you want to make it efficient. So I only managed to do a very, very, very tiny bit. And that too, I did that really fast. So as I said, my team and I are putting together like a 6-part lecture series to cover a good chunk of this in pretty detail. So it's at decodingdefi.com. You can sign up and listen to more of all of us talking about things. And I shall stop now and I will take questions.
Feel free to unmute yourself, everyone. And could you please share this on the PCH Slack, please, Anish?
Oh, yes, I will, of course.
And then they can go on decodingdefi.com.
Well, one question then.
Sure.
From the privacy layer.
Yeah.
That's on top of Ethereum.
It could be considered either on top of it or inside it. So if you're thinking of ZK rollups, I didn't go into a lot of detail. So there are a couple of ones that are there. Diversify would be, if I'm not mistaken, a ZK rollup layer that actually uses Starkware. Loopring would be a layer 2 optimization that actually provides privacy. It uses Snarks Growth 16. And there are, Aztec, again, another London company. They have their own privacy layer, kind of sits on top of Ethereum. You can kind of think of it as like the same layer, or same level, because if you do layer 2 optimization, I would say it's almost at the same level. It's kind of on top, but not on top in that kind of sense.
So if it's on top, would there be a risk if I trade something that people can see what I'm doing and with whom I'm doing it?
No, okay, let me just give you like a very simple 101 of transaction privacy. So there are two kinds of privacy that you actually have when you do transactions: the transaction privacy and identity privacy. Identity privacy is who you are, and transaction privacy is how much you transacted, right? So what literally would happen is, like, if you use something like a mixer or layer 2 rollup, layer 2 rollup in a sense is like a mixer. So it goes in and then comes out. That's like a mixing that's happening for a period in time. So effectively, what would be happening is like when you put your money in and there's this mix, if it's just one other person there, the mixing is kind of half a probability. So somebody could take a guess. Okay, who put this thing in? You can guess, toss a coin, Stefan or not Stefan, half a probability they will know, right? So that's kind of a problem. So when you go in, your address gets masked. So you get assigned a new address. Your transaction gets mapped into a bucket and things emerge on the other side. So it's kind of harder to actually map you, Stefan, to a transaction. That's typically what this does. Does it make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I experimented a little bit with Wasabi.
Okay.
Like
yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Anish.
Yes.
So, other than Ethereum, there's a lot of DeFi products being built on Ethereum. I think pretty much 90% plus.
Yep.
Do you see other protocols out there that are prominent that might have a chance to?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I think about it is like, this is something to do with not just a transaction throughput and security. It's more a network effect, right? So network effect essentially means it requires a bunch of people. Number one is you need to have enough of people who have enough of wallet, right? So there should be a set of people that's already in the ecosystem who have wallets. And they should have enough of volume to actually make any of these things happen. Number two is for any protocols we build, you need to have developers. If you don't have developers, there is, it's a moot point, right? You can't build if you don't have developers, right? And then there is this other question about, okay, do you have good bridges? So if there are value in other ecosystems and you want to bridge between that ecosystem to this ecosystem. So I suspect Cosmos and Polkadot would have a chance very soon. Polkadot is kind of ready to go. They are pumping out a very large amount of money. They have this parachains and things like that allows bridging. So I expect, at least a good chunk appearing in Cosmos and Polkadot in the next 6 months.
Cool, sounds good. Anyone else have any questions? I'm guessing everyone's waiting to subscribe to decodingdefi.com for the 6-part lecture series. And when is this starting, by the way?
Oh, we were supposed to start like a couple of days ago. We will probably be doing, it's just a bunch of lectures that's going to be dropped. So, 1 or 2 of them has already been recorded. So it's different members of the team has been recording it. We've been planning to do that early October, but I think we will be doing like by the end of October. So in the next 2 weeks, we should actually have most of it out. It's mostly the process of actually editing, making sure it gets covered the right way.
Yeah.
It's pretty boring to actually listen to somebody talk to you for an hour. So it's trying to make sure that people don't just fall off the chair sleepy. Right, so that's a challenge.
And I think one of the most important things to take into account, which you mentioned quite a lot earlier on, Anish, is the speed that the space is going at the moment. I mean, you have to stay on top of it in order to be able to have a fairly good high-level overview of what's happening in the space.
Oh, God, there's a lot of questions in the chat. Oh, God. Okay. Right. Are there any questions for me? I didn't actually look at this so far. Apologies, anyone. So if you type something into the chat and I haven't answered, now would be a good time to actually ask. I think Stefan actually asked the question. I kind of answered that. Oh, thank you, Alexandra. So for answering questions. Okay, Ralph wasn't actually asking questions. Okay then, so if there is nothing much, I shall probably stop it here now.
I think there was a question earlier. Let's have a look. Alexander, do you need to be whitelisted for Uniswap? Does that go against DeFi logic?
Oh, well, this is kind of a kind of a tricky situation we have ended up with, governance coming in, right? So in theory, if it's true DeFi, we shouldn't have the concept of whitelisting. But then, if you have an entity and, if SEC says to you, you should have AML KYC, then the challenge starts to happen. So one of the things that everybody should recognize is like when the whole thing started out, there was nothing. It was too tiny for any regulators to look at, to recognize. Now that it became large enough, people have started recognizing it, and their attention, undue attention, I would say, is on the topic. So we should expect more and more people to, really come after the whole thing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much, Anish. And thank you everybody for